Welcome all this evening. My name is Rogaya Sek. I'm a program editor at the Balie, and I'm going to be your host tonight here during this event, Afropean. That's also part of... oh, there's still music playing. I'm going to put that out. Afropean, that's also part of Forum on European Culture. This year's festival theme is We the People, and together with guest speakers and the audience, we're going to explore whether a European people exist, and if so, who are we? We're going to explore this theme in exhibitions, debates, film, theater, and interviews. And European artists and thinkers and their rich imagination is going to be the center stage. I want to welcome all of you here at home. And I also want to welcome the people who are watching from home, across Europe and maybe beyond. And tonight we welcome with us Professor of Anthropology at the University of Amsterdam, Fraay, slam poet Lisette Manessa, who brought with her Orville, what's your last name again? Orville Vreeveld. But of course, most of all, we are gathered here to immerse ourselves in the words and images of the maker of Afropean. He's a British TV presenter, a photographer, and writer. And in 2014, we traveled through Europe in search of a Black Europe that resulted in a book called Afropean, Notes on Black Europe. I just finished your book this week. I was listening to the audio book. It was really nice, read it by you. And I have to say that actually, first of all, it was really nice to be taken on a trip by you this summer when we couldn't visit like all the capitals ourselves. And it also brought me on a trip through my own memory lane, my own Afropean memories. So thank you for that, and you shined like a new light on that. So that's what I hope that we're going to do tonight, shine a new light. And well, let's dive into Afropean by listening to you, Johny Pitts.
Thank you, Rogaya. I noticed your book. I can always tell when somebody's read the book. You know, I love to see the book in a mess like that. You know, it's.
Well, actually, my colleagues did because I was listening to you in my ear like this.
Okay, I see. But anyway, I love to see the book beat up a little bit like that. It's great. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. I try and mix disciplines a lot. Writing is something that has always underpinned my work. But then if you look at the etymology of the word photograph, it comes from the ancient Greek photos, light, and graphos, to write. So we might talk about photographs as a method by which we write with light. So for me, writing underpins everything that I do, whether it's poetry or photography or a non-fiction book. So I'd like to share not just my photography and some of the words from the book, but a poem that I wrote. Really, before I began the journey, it was an imagining that I had to step into to create the book, and so a lot of it really emerges from this poem that I wrote in my early 20s. So I think I'm going to be joined here by some music. Yeah, for some music. Should we do it? I boarded the night train, cloaked to light rain, poured from 10 skies, soaked the night strain, light stained golden, glow from street lamps, absorbed the lost souls that roamed the side lanes. I spied graph cats smoking high grade, coating walls in chrome with wild sprays. I awoke from a colonial migraine, my mind gained focus alone on my train. There in the middle of the night, transition on the intercity line, an epiphany, signs I got lost in the city of lights. The barn knew a way to the typical sights that the tourism board keeps pretty and nice, or estranged from spaces where immigrants hide, where wisdom resides and interests collide with cliches revived by the ignorant bride. Big city stigmas, dissident lives, lost between cultures in liminal times, but I adopt the fullness of this in my life. Europe and Africa mixed and entwined in the glint of my eye. by dint of my ties, too intrinsically linked but insistent divides. I sift through antiquity, swim in the tides of mixed histories, until they link and combine. As I look to the view through scratched windows, sat still so I could match scenes with thoughts. I patched seams, I attached dreams with roads, till it appeared that my habitat revealed a home. Right there in Europe, the streets I roamed, as a black man from Paris back streets to Rome were transformed. Arose the story to broadcast the African diaspora in Europe. This is a call for all of les autres. Je suis un Creole, la vôtre. Come on, sending this to all of my mans, and I hope you all understand.
Thank you so much for this introduction. I missed out one thing when I said you were a British presenter and photographer, but you're also a singer.
Well,
a poet.
A band called Barnacle Soul, and we wrote this song together that was really beautifully played just then. This is the first time we performed together. But he really got the vibe of it.
Well, thank you so much. I want to start by asking, back in 2014, why did you choose the cities to go to? Which cities to go to?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, it's a mix of a few things. You know, one thing is a hunch. You know, I had a loose itinerary. I knew that I had to go to France. I had to go to places that had, you know, empires that had a history of colonialism. That was my starting point, I suppose. But then after that, you know, there were places that I went to. I mean, I went to Stockholm because I love Stockholm. You know, just because I love Stockholm and I love some of the Afropean music that emerges out of Stockholm and Sweden in general. And then I went to Russia because of the connections with the USSR in the fight for African independence, and how so many of those countries fighting for their freedom were armed with ideology and literal weapons by the Soviet Union, and a long history of black writers and artists who would go to Russia before the Second World War and after, actually, and found real solidarity there. So yeah,
in Russia, you found solidarity in Russia? In Russia,
yeah. So you look at people like Langston Hughes, Claude McKay, and Otto Heisveld as well. You know, from you know, the Netherlands and Suriname. They you know, in lots of ways, and this is something that bothers me sometimes, is communism or Marxism was a political backbone, really, of the Harlem Renaissance, and people don't really talk about that. It gets like the American dream is really good at taking the cultural and leaving behind the political. So we never hear about that Langston Hughes was a communist and that Langston Hughes was gay. You know, that's woven out of this simple narrative that you know, that gets commodified by the American dream.
So you also want to share that story by going to Moscow, and when you did like the Afropean identity that you had in mind beforehand was also what you found when you traveled through Europe in search for a black Europe?
I think this term emerges really out of naivety on my part in lots of ways.
The term of an Afropean? Or?
Yeah, sort of. I think if you look at Afropean,
so maybe we should start by what's an Afropean?
What is Afropean? Well, it was coined by David Byrne from a band called the Talking Heads, and he was on tour in Europe and noticed what he described as reverse colonization. He was kind of surprised to see so many black people in Europe, and he came across Marie Dawn from Zap Mama, a Belgian Congolese group, and just was blown away by this kind of what he felt like was almost like a new configuration of cultures and ideas, and so together they coined this term Afropean, that for me I found attractive because it was whole and unhyphenated. You know, I grew up in the UK where words like awful words that really come from like you know, where the grading of animals like horses and things like that, even words like hybrid and come out of this tradition of naming animals, and people would even use words like half caste to describe me, and then a mixed race, as if my dad, who is black, and my mum, who is white, are from two pure lines of two pure racial lines. So they're all constructs. But Afropean brought all this together in a really elegant way, I thought. But what I've quickly realised as I began to step into the shoes of this notion of Afropean is that it had reached me in a way that involved stylists and fashion photographers, and because it emerged in music, it was very controlled in a kind of almost corporate sphere. And so I wanted to start seeing if it might be helpful for, is a security guard who is from Senegal and guarding the Gare du Nord in Paris, is he Afropean? And for me, Afropean's nothing if it can't include him, or the cleaners that I would see all over the hostels. So I had to see if Afropean could be something more than a kind of fashion accessory, as elegant and beautiful as it seemed to me, it had to be more than that.
And was it more than that?
Yeah, I found it was. I found that one of the virtues of the word is that it inserts something plural into the notion of what it means to be both African and European. Our histories are so, for better or worse, are so mixed that for me it was important to find a kind of liminal space because there's no denying it. I'm European. I describe my relationship with the continent by paraphrasing an American poet, Robert Frost. And I say that my quarrel with the continent is a lover's quarrel. It's I'm from here, but then I'm also not from here. Or at least in the sort of mythologizing of what it means to be European, I'm not really always included in that. So I needed to find Afropean was a really coherent way for me to think about that, to think about a Europe that I could own as somebody with brown skin.
And maybe we can go to the beginning of your trip, because there was a manifesto you wrote and you published with a lot of rules for yourself when you started your trip, and one was that to use your artistic eye to transmute even the banal into the remarkable. So I was wondering if you can give an example of a banal thing you came across during your journey that showed you some remarkable things about Black Europe.
Well, this journey, as you maybe can tell from the photographs, was taken during the winter time, and that was very specifically because I wanted to avoid attaching blackness to anything superlative. There's a Mos Def quote. Mos Def is one of my favourite MCs in hip hop, and he talks about how we're either niggers or kings, we're either bitches or queens. And it seemed to me that very often when we talk about black lives, it's a supreme excellence, whether it's athletic or musical or vilified in a kind of ghetto urban environment. So I wanted to just find an everydayness. I wanted to find the banality of blackness.
Why did you go in the winter time?
So I went in the winter time because I wanted to avoid parties and carnivals and festivals, which so often I see white photographers looking for from black subjects, big smiles and dancing and good times. I wanted something that was quieter and more banal. So people were indoors a lot of the time that I was shooting my pictures. I spent a lot of time in the metro.
Why did you spend a lot of time in the metro? Is that Afropean for you, the metro station?
Yeah, there's a real aesthetic that emerges actually in the metro. And I've been thinking about, I don't want to psychoanalyze myself too much, but
you have to do it tonight.
But I think it's because on the metro you don't have carnivals, or parties or protests. What you have is black men and women dropping their kids off to school, commuting, going to work, and again this sort of this notion of liminality, this place between A and B. I've just found that there was a certain aesthetic on metro systems that spoke to me as somebody who sometimes feels in between places, but also of this banality, this everydayness of the black experience.
And can you, back to my first question about the banal thing that can show us some remarkable things, is there one situation you came across that that showed Afropia for you, or Afropean? For me, it was the conversations with ordinary people, you know, like, and that's one of the virtues. I think I set off without a publisher. It doesn't emerge from inside an academy. I wasn't funded. It was just, to be honest, I think I was having some kind of mental breakdown. When did you have a mental breakdown?
Sorry?
What?
I think as I was thinking I was having some kind of breakdown. I think that's what prompted me to set off on this journey. You know, I think I was sensing that all the things that had held me together, as someone who feels black and European, were falling apart. Negativity towards Europe, inside Britain, the rise of the right wing all across the continent, friends, both black and white, really falling out, and really after the financial crisis in 2008, you always see an uptick in racism when people have less money, and I really started to notice that the failure of new labour as well in the United Kingdom. Which promised so much and delivered so little, really, you know, co-opted and commodified so many left-wing ideas and created a kind of veneer of inclusion. And I think that was happening all over the world, really, at that time. It was this kind of like, this post-racial moment.
So you couldn't escape that by traveling through Europe, I guess.
Well, no, it was just that, like, I sensed it was all coming apart, and I sensed that there were fissures in this kind of, in the simulacra of this idea. And so I wanted to slip between the cracks, and really what set me off is just, I just felt that things weren't right, and I didn't have a cultural foundation to feel safe in Britain, and I wanted to build that, you know. So it really emerges from trying to find a community and a home and solidarity.
And did you find solidarity and a community and a home?
Yes and no, you know.
Let's start with one of the two. The no. No. Okay. Start with the no.
Well, you know, so when I was in Moscow, I went to the former Patrice Lumumba University, and I mentioned earlier how you know, Russia has this long history of you know, solidarity with anti-imperial movements, you know, and offered scholarships to African students during the 60s, 70s and 80s. That was the heyday anyway. Now, because of that Cold War legacy, when there was a fight for who would lead this vision of the world, whether it would be the West or the East, you have African students who are still at this university. It's not called the Patrice Lumumba University anymore. It changed its name in 91, you know, after the fall of communism. But you still have many African students at this university. And I remember going there feeling like, oh, you know, actually, this term Afropean, maybe if they stay in Russia and have children, their children would identify with the notion of being Afropean, or maybe the word would resonate for them. But when I was speaking to the students, it didn't work for them. You know, they might have been from Ethiopia or Angola or Ghana, and they were coming to get their degrees, and then they were going to go back to Ghana and try and make a life for themselves. And there was nothing strange or complicated for them in terms of their identity. They knew where they came from in a certain way. Whereas for me, I mean, it's complicated for me as well, because my black identity was robbed from me because of the transatlantic slave trade. So my grandma picked cotton in the American South, and my whole heritage, you know, is from slavery. A DNA test recently revealed that I'm mostly from Senegal.
So, like me, yeah. My dad.
But you know, so yeah, even there was a large amount of imagination that had to take place, even in terms of my notion of what blackness was. So. And
before we go to the yes, there was also one rule about not being it only search for the self, but that your journey has to be more than a search for the self.
Yeah, because I think what this could quite easily have turned into is something quite a self-indulgent search for the self. You know, like, who am I? and where do I belong? And you know, of course, that was embedded in the narrative, but I realised as I was writing it, especially in the second draft, you can see on the wall some of my notebooks. And I feel like as objects they were important to include because I wanted to go behind the scenes. But if you read them, some of the stuff is quite embarrassing actually. It's my first draft, it's me trying to work out what I'm trying to do, quite self-indulgent. And then afterwards I realised that this has to be, okay, I can begin at the personal, but it's really important that I arrive at the universal, and that this book isn't just about me searching for who I am, but about black identity in Europe at large, and that, you know...
Did you found some universal things?
Yeah, I did. I mean, it's that notion of people dealing with the aftermath of colonialism and of racism that, I mean, I think it's really exposed here. I think Gloria Becker talks about it really well in terms of that notion of white innocence. And I think what's important about that book is that it can be applied all across Europe. We have a different iteration of it, but very similar in the UK. You know, people... Paul Gilroy would call it post-colonial melancholia. You know, it's this subconscious...
Can you give an example of that?
An example of post-colonial melancholia. Yeah. Interesting. Well, okay, one thing that I find really interesting is, in Britain, for instance, is an obsession with World War II. Because it's the last good thing that happened to Britain. So like Britain's national identity is all connected to winning World War II, even though you never hear anything about the 24 million Russian people that died in World War II in Britain. It's all about how Britain saved the world, Britain and America. And so, but anything that happens after that, because of the loss of empire and the loss of Britain's status in the world, is a bad reminder. And actually the black people on the streets are a subconscious reminder of this fall of empire, and that's what Paul Gilroy is getting at, is post-colonial melancholy. So this comes out in very sort of subtle and sometimes overt ways, where people will look at black people who fought in World War II. My area, in fact, where I grew up, is very multicultural, large Yemeni community, large Jamaican community, because of people coming to the motherland after World War II to help rebuild the cities and plug the gap in the cheap labour market. But that's all kind of forgotten, you know, that there is this reductive idea of what it means to be British. I always think of, are you guys familiar with this slogan that was, we keep calm and carry on? Do you know this slogan? And we love that in Britain. But what I find hilarious is that is everything that is British and good about Britain, like stiff upper lip, keep calm and carry on. And the mythology of this statement, it's apparently, they say it was used in World War II as a reminder, as sort of these semiotics, as a reminder for the people on the streets to just, you know, we're British and we'll get through this, and the bombs flying and the blitz, whatever, but keep calm and carry on. But when you look at that, and a lot of research has been done, it was actually hardly ever used. So there's this myth-making, it was just an idea, and then somebody later created it and put it in this kind of, you know, 1940s font, and people are very proud of this keep calm.
You can put it on your wall.
Yeah, exactly, but it never existed really, you know. People didn't keep calm and carry on, people panicked, there was a lot of cowardice, it wasn't just this, you know, people hated being bombed at, you know, so, yeah.
Before we go to Lisette, let's go to the second part of a question I asked earlier. The yes, did you found a community? Did you found an identity traveling through?
I found lots of commonalities, for sure. I mean, really, when I found Marseille, which is where I've been living on and off for the past 3 years, I found a real, what I kind of describe as like an Afropean Mecca. For me, this is a place where working class black life, although of course there are huge problems there as well, very corrupt, and there is a right-wing presence there. I felt like black working class life wasn't excluded from the centre of the city, wasn't excluded from civic life. So for me, Marseille was, when I found Marseille, it was like, this is amazing, this is an entire city that really feels what might be described as Afropean. But also as well, like just some of the things that have happened to black people. You know, I mentioned Gloria Becker's book, White Innocence, and how that can be applied. And, you know, the work that the Black Archives here in Amsterdam are doing, looking at Black Pete, You know, and what's so clever is that they're building like an archive of other figures just like Black Pete all across Europe. We have it on like jam jars in the UK. We have that similar character, that obsession with a reductive black character, a gollywog. A gollywog. And they're doing research because they're showing how this figure has emerged in different capacities all across the UK. You also, you know, we had the Grenfell Tower disaster where, you know, a big tower block burned down in London. And this is something that Paul Gilroy was talking to me about, actually, is how you can, you know, the survivors of that attack and the type of people who were, not attacked, but the neglect that happened there, you can really, the survivors of that disaster might have a lot to talk about with the survivors of the Belma disaster in the early 90s. You know, might have a lot to talk about with the people who died quite recently in Marseille, where a whole row of houses fell down. You know, there are common issues that we face.
What do they have in common? What do they have in common?
Well, for one respect, they're all so-called immigrant communities. You know, so they're people who, you know, you find that there's a slight lack of empathy when people realise who have been killed in these tragedies. You know, and why are certain buildings or why is there not an outcry when people with brown skin are involved in such tragedies, and I think like that kind of the politics that emerges from these awful tragedies and in the wake of these tragedies are politics that need to be shared beyond just the immediate community. I think, and especially, you know, in terms of as we see the rise of the right-wing politics in Europe, instead of being in these smaller silos of communities, I think like if as Europe in general seems to fall apart and splinter, I think black communities in Europe, it's more important than ever to reach some kind of solidarity.
Yeah, maybe let's talk about that some more when Francio will join. And for now, I want to welcome Lisette Manessa on stage. I have a really long introduction for you. You're a slam poet. You received various prizes for your poetry, and you just describe your poetry as a quest for identity. You're living, where are you living again now?
Where I live?
Yeah.
In between Brussels and Breda.
In between Brussels and Breda. And you also have roots in Rwanda. Would you call yourself an Afropean?
I guess so, yes.
And why?
Because I really don't know any continent better or any country better than the country I'm in right now, like the Netherlands or Belgium maybe. But also, I also have roots in Africa and I also have roots in Rwanda. And when I'm there, I also feel very home, even though I don't know it as well as I know these places and cities. So yeah, because of that, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Hey everyone, how are you feeling? Can they talk?
And when you this is a little bit aligned.
Okay, cool. But can I ask them to say stuff, or is that not allowed?
Yeah, you can.
Okay. You know, it's Corona times. How is everyone doing? Yeah? I brought Orville with me, and I first want to start with something I just wrote right now about what we just heard, like a summary of it a bit. And I always like this. I always tell my musicians that come with me, I always tell them like, play this and this and this, and they're like, okay. So, do you feel like you're an Afropean? In some way?
Put the mic at his
No,
I think so.
Yeah, you think so? Okay, can you play that? You don't need to play the Afropean, but you need to play the I think so. And meanwhile, you're welcoming someone into the thought. Yeah? it's also a welcome. Yeah? Okay. See, it's really good, right? Okay. We welcome the last people. On the seats in the back are the seats in the front. We welcome people who are watching from their homes. Put off your mask, we're home now, we're coming home now. Welcome to Afropean, we the people, we're home now, we're coming home now. I want to say keep calm and carry on, but that wouldn't work here. We forget about the intercities full of stigmas here. Here we talk about the continent as colored as my hand palms. Don't forget the lines in my hands are brown. And we intertwine it with the continent as black as my elbows. Singing, I am the black man from Paris. Singing, I am the poet. Singing, I am the photographer. The other, I am my mom is black. I am my dad is white. I am an example of post-colonial melancholia. It's a story about black people saving the world now. And yes, I am Marie. And yes, I am Zap Mama. I'm Stockholm and Senegal, and am I an Afropean? And he keeps thinking about it. And he keeps thinking about it, and he keeps thinking about it. Am I more than a fashion trend? And no, I'm not the wintertime photos on the wall. No, I'm not the parties, I'm not the carnival, I'm not the festivals, not the loudspeakers in the room. No, I am the silence. I am the silence. I am the silence. I'm not from here. I'm in between, and yes, I am the photos on the walls, and yes, I am the parties, and yes, I am the carnival, and yes, I am the conversations with ordinary people. I am the mental breakdown. I am the metro stations. I psychoanalyze myself way too much. And while we listen to the searching, to the digging, the deepening, we start with the no. We start with the no, I don't feel home. I feel cold. I seek for Ethiopia. In Russia, I was robbed from my heritage by transatlantic slavery. We dive into the yes. At the end, we dive into the yes, I am, yes, we are the people. And the guitarist, he practices his finger settings meanwhile. Yes. We the people, the last people, the seats in the back are the seats in the front now. The story of Europe is the story of the African white man. We welcome you as you welcome us. This is our home now. Thank you. Thank
you so much.
What do you want to do? What does that mean? Do you want to do? Okay, I'm gonna ask you what we're gonna do. How many people do speak Dutch? Okay, so I can do a poem with like different languages: Dutch, a bit of French, a little bit of Kinyarwanda, and it's really about introducing myself and my history and where I come from and where I am right now. That's one. And the second one is a song, and it's called I Can't Breathe, and I wrote it during the protests June, because there was a lot going on in the world, but also in our countries, and also I've lived in Brussels, where there's a lot of police brutality. So yeah, it's about that. So you can choose. You have to. So number 1. And number 2. I don't know. Again, I have to hear the difference. You have to applaud louder. The first one. The second one. Okay. Yeah. And it was so hard because I wanted to be at the protest, but I couldn't. Like most protests, I missed them because, it was during Corona, and my parents were like so scared. They were like, "No, you're gonna get Corona. Don't go." And it's so weird because I've been fighting for the same things as everyone was fighting for during that period, like for years. So yeah. Then I was in my room writing this song. Another motherland is crying. Another brother ends is dying. And I'm so done seeing my people on the streets singing. I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, please, I can't breathe. Oh, and it keeps coming, when it keeps coming, how do we grieve? Ik druk mijn lippen op elkaar. Hoe kan ik spreken als ik breken moet? Mijn muur van stilte steunt mijn stem om niet te schreeuwen. Mijn tongval om vooral een algemeen beschaafde Nederlander, nee, een algemeen beschaafde neger te zijn. De witte kruipen in mijn huid. De witte kruipen in mijn huid als het koud is. Ergens tussen november en december in. En ze knellen hun knieën in mijn nek en doen dit gewoon voor de lol. Doen dit gewoon voor de lol. En zelfs de Karenen posten de zwarte vierkantjes. Zelfs de Karenen posten de zwarte vierkantjes. Doen mee met de hype, de hypnose. En ze protesteren op het plein met bongo's en conga's alsof het kinderfeestjes zijn. Dat zwarte levens ertoe doen en zwarte mensen worden zelfs woedend op elkaar. En Silicon Valley kijkt op ons neer alsof we petiterige schietgebedjes zijn. Die om kwijtschelding vragen. I can't breathe, oh, I can't breathe. I can't breathe, please, I can't breathe, oh, and it keeps coming, when it keeps coming, how do we grieve? Oh, I can't breathe, please, I can't breathe, and it keeps coming, oh, I can't breathe, officer, I can't breathe, and it keeps coming, ow, how do we heal? Dank jullie wel.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy that's not your last song, that you're also going to sing one more song, or poets, or everything that you can do. And also, thanks you, Orville. Now I want to welcome on stage Professor of Anthropology of the University of Amsterdam, Francio Guadalupe. And let's start with a question. Do you feel like an Afropean?
You ask me the most
difficult question. Like the... The most
It's
difficult
on,
question.
yeah. He asked me a very difficult question. Let me first start by saying that everyone who is not here should come and see this exhibition because it's wonderful.
It's here till the 1st of November.
All right, so that I think is important. And secondly, I enjoyed your performance and I enjoyed hearing you speak. Now to your question. No, I do not feel myself an Afropean, and I'll explain to you why not, because I have a different understanding of what I think an Afropean would connote. I consider myself a Caribbean European person. Why? Because in the Caribbean, when someone said, I'm Afro-Caribbean, they meant I'm in the Caribbean, but my ancestors were from Africa. So you had Afro-Caribbean people, you had Indo-Caribbean people, you had Sino-Caribbean people, you had Euro-Caribbean people, and so forth. So when someone from the Caribbean moves to Europe, they will not say, I'm Afropean. No, I have to take into account that there's a 500-year history that formed me in the Caribbean, so I'm Caribbean European. There are some people who will be Afropean if they wish, and Afropean to me would then mean someone who is in Europe with relationships because of their ancestors or their family directly from the African continent. So an Afropean, if it's not racialized, will also contain Afrikaners. It will also contain people who are Berbers, because all of them, their families, are linked to the African continent. That's why I do not consider myself an Afropean. I will show solidarity with Afropeans, people who have that linkage.
What do you think of that, Johny?
It's a really good point, and it's in some ways Afropean emerged from me not having Caribbean heritage. In some ways, although for me, I wanted Afropean to be inclusive of people from the Caribbean, of course, but I found that in Britain, my blackness wasn't a part of what is commonly reduced to the notion of the Windrush generation, the Empire Windrush. They docked in 1948, and the whole notion of being black and British is very much wrapped up in this idea of being from the Caribbean. And so for me, I couldn't find what I was...
A label for yourself.
Yeah, no, I just couldn't find it, you know, and there would be sometimes embarrassing moments where I'd try to take part in that notion of being from the Caribbean because it was the easiest and closest proximity I had to any notion of blackness, and I had solidarity. It kept me afloat as somebody who was black in Britain to know that there was this Caribbean heritage.
If there's a definition of Afropean for you, would it also include Francio, Guadeloupe?
Well, I mean, that's not for me to say, because I'm not going to tell friends, oh, actually, I think you're mistaken, you are Afropean. For me, it's a term that if it resonates with somebody, if somebody feels they need to step into a world that is both feels both African and European and plural, then that's when the term is for them. If you don't need that, and kind of as I mentioned when in Russia when I met a student who might have been from Ghana, and they're from Ghana, and if that is working for them, then I'm not going to try and complicate things. But having said that, also in the end, the notion of Afropean was sort of trying to broaden the conversation beyond what I thought of as a kind of Caribbean black British identity. I wanted it to include that, but go beyond it as well. But I can totally understand why people wouldn't need Afropean as a term.
And Francio, I'm wondering, in the past you also had critique on using race as a religion. Do you feel like we are in a Afropean church right now?
I wouldn't dare say so. No, no, I don't think so. I think that people have a right to identify in that way, and I think other people will not feel the need to identify that way. I think those 500 years made a difference. Now, when we say Afro-Caribbean in the Caribbean, there is a dash between. The dash is important because what the dash does is it troubles the Afro not to make it a monolith, and it troubles the Caribbean not to make it a monolith either. So the dash matters. The dash is vital so that this thing does not become one monolithic identity. So that when I meet someone from who might be Afro-Caribbean like myself, but actually has a Surinamese background, I have to be able to recognize that there is a different rhythm to that Afro-Caribbean person of a Surinamese extraction. So when I meet someone of Afro-Caribbean descent who is Dominican, there's a different vibe to it. That's why the dash matters in the Afro-Caribbean way of understanding things.
It's interesting you say so, because you had also a really difficult word for it, unhyphenated or something.
Yeah.
For you, it's really important that Afropean is one word without a dash.
Yeah, that's true. It's really interesting that Francio mentions that the hyphen is really important, because for me, my life had been almost marked by the hyphen. I've been sort of half this, a bit that. I had never thought about it with the idea of actually within the black community of showing respect. That okay, you're African American. I could see why the hyphen is important for me. The term Afropean and the removal of the hyphen is almost, I don't know if it's a utopian project exactly, but it's looking forward, it's looking to the future. And Afropean is not a term, I don't actually go around telling people that I'm Afropean. It's more like a heuristic, it's a portal into a world that I felt like wasn't being really documented in the way that I thought it should. But that's not to say that this term isn't something that constantly moves around. And Afropean for me wasn't really a destination. It was a beginning of a journey. And by the end of it, I was less sure than probably ever before of what Afropean was. And yet at the same time, I felt that it was something that looked forward towards building bridges between communities. So for me, it was something that helped me work through notions of identity and work towards something that I felt was important.
And how do you listen to him because you're always you're critical against labels? Do you think a label as Afropean has any benefit?
Look, I think he just explained that it was a starting point for him. Starting point on a journey to try to achieve something. Now, let me say two things about that. The first one is that it perhaps can move from an artistic identity, which it was, an artistic label, to something political. And then you try to unite people based upon that political label. No one actually was Afropean, but everyone can become Afropean to fight for particular rights. That's a possibility. If you take another possibility, let's say Caribbean, European, you keep the dash, then the dash allows you to connect with others because you're living around them. So which means I can connect to people of Moroccan descent. I can connect to native Dutch who live in the same neighborhood, and we can also then build something political to do something because we want particular rights, because we're against injustice, because we're against racism and economic inequalities and so forth. So there's two routes that one can take in this, and it's not for me to say that if you try to make it a political label, that's not okay. I saw that happened with the negritude among Césaire and so forth. So there is always that possibility. Since I'm more on the side of lots of translations, I'm more on the side of just recognizing the specificities, but with the dash that allows the specificity never to close itself off in itself and allows it, because the dash is also a bridge towards the other.
What do you think of it?
No, it's interesting. I suppose I just felt that everything that had held me together was splintering apart. And I think of the words of E.M. Forster, where he talks about, only connect. So there's something that was trying to be connective, and and not let Europe off the hook as well. I wanted to embed blackness in Europe in a really, I don't know, in a really solid way. You know, I wanted to talk about a Europe and a blackness that was both, you know, a Europe that was, there's no getting away from the history of blackness in Europe. And I just felt like Afropean is something that brings everything together in a way that, you know, it doesn't detach these identities. Because I think a lot of W.B. Du Bois is a double consciousness. But after 100 years, I think that there are people who are so indelibly woven into the cultural fabric of Europe that they can't be denied. They can't be denied here, and they can't deny it themselves. And you know, where do we go from that moment? How do we reconcile these various cultures into something coherent? So for me, Afropean is something that is an inventive, futuristic kind of word that I think has helped me piece a jigsaw together in a way.
Do you also think these people have been denied in a certain way?
There's two things. There's either the people have been denied, many people have experienced discrimination and still experience discrimination. There is no doubt about that. Then there's the question of the cultural expressions, black cultural expressions. And then there's also the history of Europe that also contains traces and was formed by its interaction with many people who were blackened from Africa and from the wider Americas and Asia and so forth. So when I look at the subtitle, and the subtitle speaks of Black Europe, then I think of C.L.R. James. And C.L.R. James said, you cannot understand Europe if you do not understand the black experience. That, I think, is spot on when it comes to dealing and tackling racism. That is something we have to do. But I don't conflate them.
Do you think black people in Europe have something in common? If I abstract enough for a black person, then I will say yes. If I stick into what's going on, then there are many commonalities and a whole lot of differences at one and the same time. So the commonalities that someone who is now in the refugee camps has with me, he will probably, or that person, she will have more commonalities with someone who's in that refugee camp that is from Syria. So therefore I say, only if you abstract enough, then you can say, yes, we have a commonality. But we have lots of commonalities. What do we have in common when you abstract?
When I extract all the way, that's far enough, far enough.
Fly to the moon.
Far enough, then I could say, many European states will actually label both of us black. That's our commonality. That's an administrative category where we both will fall into. That's a commonality that we have.
Well, that was really the starting point of my journey too, and I think that Afropean is an abstraction and kind of emerged. I remember initially my notion of Afropean when I set off was something that's similar to this notion of Afropolitan, which is the success stories. But then when I visited Calais and I went to the jungle, something interesting happened. And I was speaking to a young man, Hisham, from Sudan, and we were chatting, and he said, you should write about my story. And I thought, I wonder why he thinks that I should write about his story. And obviously he saw some kind of connection. He saw that maybe your roots in and you understand my world and the world that I want to understand my world. But I felt awkward about it because, like Francio was saying, what do I actually have in common? What do I know about, arriving in Calais at a bunch of windswept shacks after being torn from the place I was born? That's not my experience, actually. And then after I left, so we exchanged details, and after I left the jungle, the so-called jungle, I was on my bike because I'd taken a bike and crossed over Dover in a ferry. So I had my bike with me and I started cycling away. And I realised I was being followed by the French military police. And I was just about to get into the compound where you have to show your passport. But before I could even show my passport, the military police stopped me and said, "Where are you going?" I said, oh, I'm just going in. So they didn't even let me get my documents out. And they said, where have you been? Where have you come from? What are you doing? And they thought that I had left, I was trying to escape from the jungle. And that's when I realized I wanted to take an imaginative leap that could connect. I mean, this might have been called back in the day third world politics, but you know, that could connect my experience of otherness, but that is really embedded in Europe with the experience of someone like Hisham. That could, you know, my journey really is about third, fourth, fifth generation black people in Europe, but also as a kind of, to show a kind of cultural base that newer arrivals might feel is home. But that is precisely the moment for me when this notion of Afropean did become an abstraction, where it had to be more than just this kind of cozy idea. I had to find a way, and again, this is where the lack of the getting rid of the hyphen comes from. It's all about trying to build bridges and cross borders, rather than, especially as we've seen a rise in nationalism, rather than encourage the notion of borders. So that's when Afropean became a deeper and at the same time more abstract idea, imaginative idea.
When you walked in, you said, why did he also go to Rotterdam?
Yeah.
So I found it interesting why do you think maybe it was nice when he also went to Rotterdam?
No, I'm biased.
Why were you curious?
I admit I'm biased. What I think that you find in Rotterdam is a lot of creolization. You find a lot of Creole cultures, mixtures that have become ordinary. You find a kind of natural, what used to be called multiculturalism, a natural diversity. So therefore I asked whether photos were taken also in Rotterdam, because I think it presents a different inflection of what's going on in the Netherlands than Amsterdam.
Do you think it has also something to do with the capitals and other big cities? Because maybe Marseille, that's where you found also kind of Rotterdam, maybe. I don't know, have you ever been in Rotterdam?
Yeah, I have, yeah, and I do have pictures. They're not included in the book, and the narrative is not included. I mean, because, you know, a book has a beginning, middle, and an end, and there's a certain amount of space that you have, and also money and time. But, you know, this, I think of something that Derrida talks about, where he talks about, you know, archiving is as much a chance to sublimate and suppress history as it is to preserve it. So I'm very aware of the gaps in this book, which the book emerges out of an online space, which is Afropean.com, and the community that built around this online destination then fed into the knowledge of the book. But what I hope happens now, and what is happening, is that people might take the book and then contribute to the website.
Yes. So I also want to talk later on about the communities. Yeah. But first, I'm not interested in why you left certain cities out, because I can imagine that you can travel through all the cities of Europe. But what did you find were the differences between Paris and Marseille?
Well, it's something that, you know, it's almost like connected to the notion of the Black Atlantic that was really popularized by Paul Gilroy. And Paul Gilroy is a sociologist from the UK who suggests that we might invert the map and look at the space between nations and continents as a place of black knowledge production. And also because, you know, if you root your identity away from land in something that's in a space of water, it's something that suggests fluidity, and you've got all these travels of sailors who are escaping the reductive politics of the nation state, and also obviously the slave trade. So you've got all this knowledge that happens in the body of water between continents and nations. Marseille, and I think about this a lot. I was thinking, if you were to take Paris, and then Cairo, right? Would you ever mistake Paris for Cairo? No, you wouldn't. You'd easily be able to tell Paris and Cairo apart. If you take Marseille and Alexandria, You can't tell the difference so easily. So there's a kind of a culture and an identity that emerges in this space between places. And so for me, Marseille has something that is Mediterranean and looks beyond the landmass and has shared cultural identities with a place beyond just France or Europe. And that's why that was the big distinction between Marseille and Paris for me.
Do you think, as an anthropologist, that there are some differences between these capitals and other cities? Where we're talking about, like,
I think we're talking about port cities. And port cities have a specific dynamic to them because they are indeed connected to the waters. When I arrive in Rotterdam and I leave the central station, I go into the city center, the black presence is right in the city center. It's Kruiskade. It's right there. When I leave the central station, there is a gigantic mural of a rapper looking at me, Winner, of Surinamese descent. So I don't feel that I need to look for the presence. It's right there. It's immediately there. And I think that is what port cities do, because they can't really control how things will be distributed. They just distribute themselves.
And about the community? Because when your book was finished, Afropean is more than a book. It became a community, or you tried to make it a community.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because, you know, I keep thinking about this. Could Afropean turn into something that's a political project? And what is the distinction between the cultural and the political? You know, and I don't want a cultural movement that is completely depoliticized, but then at the same time, I'm not sure I want to be restricted to thinking of Afropean solely in terms of politics. So, you know, so it's a tricky one. So, like, what can Afropean do? What can it? And for me, I think it's as simple as the fact that it's a place for people to come together and share knowledges. You know, and that's what the book needs to do, is contribute to this ongoing conversation that we're having online. Where people are saying, well, I grew up in Slovakia, and have you heard about what's happening here? And this is what I went through, and how does that chime with what you went through? And, you know, and it's amazing how people sort of, it's become a meeting space. You know, this notion of conviviality, you know, what made the Harlem Renaissance so amazing, it wasn't just an American thing. You had people coming from all over the former colonies. You have people whose first languages were Dutch, were Danish, you know, and the way the Harlem Renaissance worked is that people would walk past each other, and people would come together in squares and listen to orators talk and share their ideas and contribute to a kind of collective pot. And that's what I'm interested in, is producing something like that.
Nice. I want to go to the audience, but I don't know do we have a mic?
No, but it's small enough.
So maybe then, in that case, I'm going to say goodbye to the people who are watching the stream. And this Johny Pitts here. You can still watch this here at Foam until the 1st of November. And there are also still tickets available for our festival, Forum on European Culture. So thank you for watching. En nu naar jullie, or now, okay, now I don't have to speak English anymore because no. So before there are any questions, I was wondering, who of you feel like I'm part of this? Sorry, I'm going to ask it again. Afropean, I'm an Afropean. I want to call myself an Afropean. And waarom? And why?
Well, it's interesting because I'm a former student of Almicheal, and we had this conversation for, I think, almost 8 years now. And now I can say that I disagree with his vision, but he made me think about the concept of identity and my identity. Because I feel connected. You made an interesting point, Rocio, with people of color, black people specifically living in refugee camps. But I feel I would identify as Afropean because I feel connected with black people, black European people, black people who are born in Europe, because I think that there are a lot of commonalities, and I think for me, it would, sometimes I could identify as Caribbean Dutch, but then I think I have more connection with other people, for example, from Senegalese descent, who are born here, than people who are born and raised in the Caribbean and then came here. Also, someone else who feels like a Caribbean or you? No? Are there any questions from the audience? Yeah?
Yeah, I'm wondering because you finished the book in Lisbon, that's sort of the last chapter.
Yeah.
And Lisbon is also from where a lot of things started, not very good things, related to this whole history. I was wondering why you chose to finish in Lisbon. Was it just a logistical choice, or was there any specific reason?
Well, actually, I chose to finish in Gibraltar. Yeah, so that's the actual. The last chapter is Lisbon, but because there's a space in Gibraltar where you can stand on the shores of Europe and look at the shores of Africa, and there seemed something emblematic in that. And then it was just logistical, that just passing through, on the way I could get through Portugal. But I wanted to tell that story as well, because Portugal's one of those places, like you were saying, it's had the longest length of colonization, and the King of Portugal, when he got permission, he got a papal bull signed to begin a kind of slavery. A lot of things did begin in Portugal, and yet because of the Salazar dictatorship, it's said that Salazar was a hermit leader who wanted to turn Portugal into a hermit country. And so really, you don't hear much about Portugal, even to this day. When you think about Portuguese culture, you get it second-hand. In the UK, I'm being reductive here, but in the UK you get peri-peri chicken, which emerges via Mozambique. You get samba. And when people think of the Portuguese language, very often, I mean, I know it's different because there are Portuguese speakers in places like Switzerland, but very often in the UK anyway, we think of Brazilian Portuguese. We don't think of Portuguese, which can almost sound Eastern European to an English ear. It's quite a surprise. So it's just amazing how Portugal had travelled the globe, but then had constructed a sort of identity that was a country that didn't exist beyond its borders. And so for me, that was a chance to explore that. And I just felt you begin the journey in Britain and in France, these big former colonizers, and then you kind of pass through these other strange places like Stockholm and Moscow, but it felt good. Good is the wrong word, but it felt very valuable to finish the book in a place where this real huge history of colonization, has taken place. So yeah.
More questions? Yeah.
I was interested by the notion that we were talking about culture, politics, and equality, but sort of like as different notions. And I find it very interesting the hyphenization or not between Afro, where you want to be diverse and stuff, but if you want to organize and get inequality out, then at least how we politicalize stuff, it becomes very much about trying to find commonalities. And so I was interested, and especially a question to Francois, about how he read a book about finding identity and organization in such, versus also keeping more rich forms of identifying yourself into subcultures.
I didn't read the book, so I can't comment on the book. No, I can't comment on the book. I think that when you want to organize yourself politically, then you need an identity that doesn't exist. It's outside of all that exists. You create something new, and then people can identify with that something new. There was a time, I think, in Great Britain when you had political blackness. Then people who were of Caribbean descent and Pakistani descent and Sri Lankan descent, all of them considered themselves black. That was a political identity because no one could actually claim it. If you take it further, you will see that in Haiti, when they gained their independence in 1805, the Constitution said everyone here who's against inequality and racism is black. So it meant all the persons who were African descent, but also the Polish persons and also the German persons. That was a political identity. So I think you always need a political identity that cannot be claimed by any to actually do your fighting. So if one wants to use Afropean for that, it cannot have traces that will say some people are more Afropean than other people. Mm-hmm. Then it's a political identity.
More questions? Yeah.
I have a question to Mr. Guadalupe. What you were telling about, I'm hoping I'm saying it right in English, if I'm abstracted to a certain level, you can identify on a certain amount with other black people. Could you apply that same logic on, for instance, for me as a woman, that I can identify myself as a woman all over the world, or is it something fundamentally different?
No, I think just like with but you can also answer it too. I think also like with the feminist movement, you had a similar something. They presuppose a universal woman, and that came crashing down when people had to recognize there were all kinds of differences within the commonalities and so forth. They could still abstract and say there's such a thing as womanhood, but like he was saying, we both would experience the checkpoint, but I can leave the checkpoint because I have the right passport. That person will stay there. I don't know what it means to experience that. So in the abstract form, what I think is better is for me to say, I will show solidarity with refugees. I won't claim we are the same. No, we're not the same. But I should show solidarity because something is going wrong there. Like I think with feminism, that was what it was about. It was a show of solidarity amongst women who said, you know, I might have it good and you have it bad. Solidarity, we have to right this wrong.
Do you also have an answer to that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the political movements were crushed. We talk about political blackness. It was crushed really by neoliberal capitalism, and I think what happened is we became very depoliticized, my generation, and oblivious in lots of ways, and kind of forgot.
Do you really think we are depoliticized?
I think if you were born in the 1980s, I think people are getting politicized again, you know. But I think if you were born in the 1980s, you came of age in the sort of 2000s, even with 9/11.
And why do you think that is?
Because I think a lot of the politics of the left was swallowed up and commodified. When we think of New Labour and Tony Blair in Britain, you know, he, on the one hand, would promote this notion of a multicultural Britain. On the other hand, you know, some of the lead MPs, like David Blunkett, who was my local MP, were talking about how you know, Britain was being swamped by migrants, you know. So, yeah, I think that what I guess I'm trying to say is that I think there was a war on the imagination of my generation. And I think that when you have the fall of communism and you have nothing to balance capitalism out anymore, there's just one way forward, and politicians stop talking about their dreams for a more equitable society and more their dreams about what is good for business. I think that there was a war on the imagination of my generation, so it's great to see young people especially bringing that back and thinking of ways to come together. And that's what Afropean is for me, is in imagining, trying to be imaginative and think of a way that we might build bridges and solidarities.
Is there one last question maybe from the audience? Yes?
I wondered, following all your travels, if there's a difference now in the way you see communities in the UK when you're back there. Is there, I don't know, something you know, it sounds simplified, but has it changed the way you look on, communities?
Only in so much as, and I think this is another thing that I wanted to do is anchor myself to something larger than this small nation that was starting to become increasingly right-wing. And so I think when I returned, what was nice is that, Britain can be quite insular and quite dominant in terms of the notion of blackness. There's, the black identity in Britain, the black identity in America is very prominent in the whole notion of the African diaspora. But when I came back to Britain, I realized that I wasn't alone and that it wasn't only us, and that actually there are communities. I live in Peckham in London, and I found Peckham all over Europe, versions of Peckham that these places where these cultures had come together, where I recognized the same kind of stores. And that's not to say that everything is the same. There were very different identities embedded within that. But there were places, it felt like suddenly I was attached to a landmass now, full of communities like the ones that I grew up in. And that felt very empowering, actually. It felt like I'm not just going to be trapped on this small little insular island.
Before we're going to listen to Lisette one more time, I was wondering, because we're here seated and all your pictures are around us, so maybe you can pick one photograph and tell us the story behind it.
Well, I'll tell a little happy story here, because there's something crazy happened. You see this photograph, the Eiffel Tower. See the photograph below the Eiffel Tower. Does anybody recognize this guy?
Yeah, sorry. Oh, no, not me, maybe.
Well, so I met, it took me a long time to write this book, and when I was in Paris, I was staying in a hostel, and there was this guy, and we were all sort of smoking together, hanging out, and he was playing his music, and he was staying in the same hostel as me. And then he said, I'm going to go out to do some busking in the Paris metro. And so I joined him and I took some photographs, and we just hung out in Paris for a few days together. He's a really nice guy. Anyway, years later, last year my book comes out in the UK, and David Byrne from the Talking Heads hears about my book and how I'm using Afropean, and invites me to go to one of his gigs at the O2 Arena, one of the big arenas in London, to go and see his gig. So I go there, and who do I see as the support act? But this guy,
Benjamin Clementine.
And the thing is, his name's Benjamin Clementine, and he won the Mercury Prize. He's a huge deal now, and it was fascinating to see that moment of seeing this. I had a real sort of Afrobeat. We were both young men, not sure what we wanted to do with our lives, where we were going, where our journeys were going to take us. Right at the beginning of the journey when I was in Paris. And so that felt like a really nice moment that I had this book, Afropean, and I was watching him on stage perform in front of thousands of people, So, yeah.
Nice. I really love the picture, the photograph. Well, I have to say thank you so much, Francois Guadeloupe. Thank you also so much, Johny Pitts. And for the people who haven't read his book yet, please do, because I really love it. And I also can recommend to not read the book, but listen to it. You read it to the audience yourself, like with the audiobook. It took you 6 days.
I'll never do that again. It was what it was. People kept telling me how hard it is, but I'm like from a spoken word background. I was like, I'm going to kill this. This is going to it's my book, and I didn't have to narrate it, no problem, And I came out a broken man. I'm telling you, after that, it was one of the hardest. I don't know why it was so hard, but it was so hard.
But you didn't sound like a broken man, so still I recommend the album. So welcome on stage again, Lisette Manessa.
Okay, there we are again. I will start with the poem that I didn't do, because like you applaud kind of the same way, so I'm like, you probably want to hear this. Yeah. I want to ask you to close your eyes. And you think about the feeling of seeing your mother crying for the first time. And you're just young, and you cannot do anything about it. And that feeling, it sounds like this. Keep your eyes closed. And think about a feeling of homesickness. But this kind of homesickness is to a country that doesn't exist anymore. Or homesickness to a place that you've never been in yet. But you do feel homesick. And then there's this feeling of counting and counting and counting and counting and counting. What are we counting? We're counting the people that we love, that we lose. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Voici l'histoire de la petite sœur. Voici l'histoire de la petite sœur qui avait de la douleur dans son cœur. Het kleine zusje. Het kleine zusje dat haar mama troosten wou. Maar niet wist dat ze Rwandese moeders niet troosten kon. Het begon. Het begon. Het begon tussen Congo, Burundi, Tanzania en Oeganda in. Mamma mia, we gaan Rwanda in. Het troosteloze, dakloze, 1000 doden weer, 1000 doden meer dan 1000 doden Duits, Afrikaans Oosten en ik. Ik ben de dochter van de vluchteling. Ik ben in Nederland geboren. Toch in Afrika gemaakt, net te laat. Ik ben een Afro-Europeaan. In België ben ik de Hollander. In Holland ben ik de Brabander. In Brabant ben ik de Afrikaan. In Afrika de Europeaan. In Brussel. In Brussel ben ik Lisette. In Brussel voel ik me thuis. Kolonisatiewijs is dat juist mensen. Mensen van mijn kleur. Wij zijn gekooide vogels. Waarom maken wij geluid? En ik kruip. En ik kruip en ik kruip en ik kruip in mama, haar mama, nee, haar mama's uit. En ze fluit zo luid. 1994. 1994. Hier is het. Wie de genocide niet kent, die leest erover. die luistert naar de verhalen van wie grootouders doden. Hier is het wie de genocide niet kent, die leest erover. Die luistert naar de verhalen van wie grootouders Joden. Hier tellen we de doden van 1000 jaar geleden. Thuis is het. Thuis is het wie de genocide kent, die spreekt er niet over. Wie deze niet kent, die weet er niets over. Wie de Hitler is van mijn land, ik spreek er niet over, breek er niet over. Ik ben een leek, ik weet er niets over, ween er niet over. Mijn Tweede Wereldoorlog is nog jonger dan mijn zus. Ze roept, Oete, papa, Oete. Maar in dit liedje vinden ze hem wel terug. Nee, kijk, een oorlog die je zelf niet hebt meegemaakt is in het huis een kamer waarin je niet binnen geraakt. En we zitten in de woonkamer. En mama huilt. In het Afrikaans. En tussen haar tranen door laat ze getallen vallen. Rimwe, Kaviri, Gatatu, Kane, Gatandatu, Karingu, Munani, Ichenda, Ichumi, mama, wafuye Munambara, mama, je bent de oorlog uitgekomen, Arikose, Inambara, Isaku, mama, maar komt de oorlog ooit uit jou, Rimwe, Kaviri, Gatatu, Kane, Gatandatu, Karingu, Munani, Ichenda, Ichumi. Ijana nung, ijana nakaviri, ijana nagatatu. 97, 99, 104, 105. En dan stopt ze met tellen. Ze heeft zoveel mensen verloren dat ze het niet wilt weten. Mais c'est l'histoire de la petite sœur. Qui avait de la douleur dans son cœur, elle a pris sa peau, comme un gâteau. Aardappeltjes schillen, deed ze op haar huid plooien. Mama kon mij niet ontplooien. Dit is het verhaal van de Rwandese moeder die haar dochter troosten wou, maar niet wist dat zwarte meisjes die wenen in witte talen niet te troosten zijn. Dat zwarte meisjes die wenen in witte talen niet te troosten zijn. Mijn oma was 15 en werd uitgehuwelijkt. Ik was 15 en ik werd depressief. Om niets. Ik had het leven. Het leven waar zij voor hadden gestreden. Het leven waar zij voor hadden gebeden. Het leven waar zij aan waren overleden. Niet lief, ik was de reden waarom zij waren gevlucht. Maar ik wilde terug. Ik wilde terug. Ik wilde terug. Dankjewel. Dankjewel. I'm so sorry for you not speaking English and Dutch and other people who don't speak Dutch. You cannot understand the full poem, but you can kind of understand it with the music and some words that I say, I think. But there's the last poem that I wrote just now, and it's kind of a summary again of the conversation that we listened to and took part of. Okay. Orville, are you ready? Okay, so you know when you were like a little kid, years ago. No, he always jokes about me being a little kid in his eyes, so this is funny. Years ago. Okay, and I remember you would go to the supermarket, and the supermarket would be so big, you know, like huge, and there was so much, and you wanted everything, and then like while you were like walking around and looking at things and being like, oh, I want this and I want this, and then 1 second goes away and your mother is gone, you know, and then you're just there as a little kid and you're just like, where's my mom? That feeling. But you also know that you can just like go to a random person and be like, I lost my mom, and everything will be okay. You know that somewhere, but still you're, you know. We call this like poetic improvisation. I say something poetic, and then he improvises. I think I'm missing like the kind of anxiety of like yeah, like the adrenaline, yeah, that's the search for your mom. Yeah, are we satisfied? Yeah. Okay, this is called Less Sure. Let's have a dialogue. Let's have a dialogue on sometimes. I'm sure you are less sure now. Sometimes, hey, what do you feel like is as complex as blackness. As funny as where are you from? Is the dash a bridge, or does it hold me together to split it apart? Remember, there was a time where everyone anti-racism considered themselves as black. What is the black experience? Am I black? Am I as black as my skin? I'm sure you are less sure now. Perhaps the white girls didn't deny me. Perhaps I denied myself. Perhaps you didn't escape from the jungle. Perhaps the jungle escaped from you. Your mother left your tongue. Your accent might cheat on you. Don't speak. Don't speak. I tell myself, don't speak. Don't ask questions. I tell myself, don't ask questions. I'm sure you are less sure now. You don't know why the caged bird sings. You can't tell Cairo apart from Paris, but there's a space between the places, and there's a place where people come together, a meeting space on the World Wide Web. It's called Afropean. And there's dialogues on sometimes, on similarities, on commonalities, on differences within diversity, on Stockholm and Russia, on Moscow and Marseille, on communities, on Rotterdam. I'm biased. Young girl, did you find your mother back yet? And in my head, I think to myself, maybe Marseille. Maybe Marseille will make me feel like I found my mother. Perhaps I'll be more sure then. Then you play an outro. and you found your mother. Yay! Thank you so much. And thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lisette Manessa, Orville Breveld, Franco Guadalupe, and Johny Pitts.